There is a version of you that you never see. It watches from just behind your eyes. It makes decisions before your conscious mind has even framed the question. It chooses who you love, who you resent, and who you quietly, secretly envy. And it does all of this while the rational, reasonable, thoughtful part of you believes it's the one in charge. This hidden self is not a villain. It's not a flaw in your design. It is, in fact, the oldest part of you, the part forged over hundreds of thousands of years of survival, competition, and social living. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Robert Greene spent years researching and writing about. Most people never meet this part of themselves. They go through their entire lives reacting to other people, to circumstances, to ancient emotional triggers, believing that their reactions are reasonable, that their judgments are fair, that their intentions are pure. And because everyone around them is doing the same thing, the whole performance feels normal. Think about the last time you said something in anger that you later regretted. Think about the last time you were absolutely certain you were right, and then discovered, quietly, that you weren't. Think about the last time someone's success made you feel smaller and you told yourself you were just being realistic. These aren't random failures of character, they are patterns. Predictable, ancient, deeply human patterns. And once you learn to see them, you cannot unsee them. This is what Robert Greene set out to document in The Laws of Human Nature. Not a self-help guide, not a list of tips, but a comprehensive map of the forces that drive us. The irrational currents beneath rational behavior, the masks we wear so convincingly that we forget we're wearing them at all. And most importantly, the question that haunts every page of the book: can a person truly know themselves? And if they can, what becomes possible? Section 1. The emotional self. Let's begin where everything begins, with emotion. Here is something that should disturb us more than it does. Human beings are not primarily rational creatures who occasionally feel things. We are primarily emotional creatures who occasionally reason. The thinking comes second, almost always. The ancient Greek philosophers understood this. They called it phemos, the spirited, irrational part of the soul that craves recognition, status, fairness. The part that will sacrifice its own interests just to prove a point. The part that will burn a friendship to the ground rather than admit it was wrong. Robert Greene calls our failure to see this in ourselves emotional blindness. And it is, he argues, the root cause of most of the suffering we create for ourselves and others. Consider the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a man history remembers as the philosopher king, the embodiment of Stoic reason. What most people don't know is how hard Marcus Aurelius worked at that reputation. His private journals, what we now call the Meditations, are not the serene thoughts of a man who had conquered his emotions. They are the exhausted, relentless effort of a man who fought his emotions every single day, sometimes minute by minute. He wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He had to write it because he kept forgetting it. That is the honest reality of emotional mastery. It isn't a destination, it is a practice. But here's what Greene argues is the critical first step. Something far more foundational than control: recognition. Most of us have what he calls a biased perception of ourselves. We see our anger as justified, our envy as invisible, our insecurities as hidden. We have constructed an image of who we are: reasonable, kind, rational, fair, and we defend that image with enormous unconscious energy. When reality threatens the image, we don't update the image, we distort reality. The psychologists call this ego-protective thinking. Greene calls it the primary obstacle to becoming fully human. He invites us to practice something radical, to become an observer of ourselves, to watch our emotions the way a scientist watches a chemical reaction, with curiosity rather than judgment, with detachment rather than identification. When you feel defensive, ask, "What is this protecting?" When you feel irritated, ask, "What does this remind me of?" When you feel inexplicably drawn to someone, ask, "What need are they fulfilling?" This is not comfortable. Self-observation never is. But it is, and this is the word Greene uses deliberately, liberating. Because the moment you see the emotion as an object, rather than living inside it as a subject, you gain a degree of choice you didn't have before. Not complete freedom. We are never completely free from our natures, but a margin. And in that margin, wisdom lives. Section 2. Seeing through people. Now, here is where the book shifts from inward to outward, and where it becomes genuinely fascinating. If we are all, to varying degrees, blind to our own emotional undercurrents, what does that mean for the way we read other people? It means, quite simply, that most of what people present to the world is a performance. Not a deliberate lie, necessarily, but a managed version of themselves, constructed to receive approval, avoid vulnerability, and project a particular image. Greene calls this the mask, and he is not being metaphorical. He means it almost literally. Most people have developed, through years of social conditioning, a polished outer persona designed to interact with the world. Friendly, professional, reasonable, modest. Whatever the situation requires. Beneath the mask, and this is where it gets interesting, lives something altogether different. Take, for example, one of history's most fascinating figures, Milton Erickson, the psychiatrist and hypnotherapist who became, by all accounts, the most gifted observer of human behavior in the 20th century. What gave Erickson his extraordinary ability to understand people was not magic. It was attention. Specifically, attention to the things people didn't say, the micro-expressions, the incongruences between words and body language, the things that slipped out unguarded in the spaces between sentences. He understood what Greene argues throughout this book. The truth about a person rarely comes from what they say. It comes from the gaps. Watch what people do when they think no one is watching. Listen to the stories they tell at dinner, because the stories we choose to tell reveal what we're proud of, what we're ashamed of, and what we secretly believe about ourselves. Notice who someone talks about most. Notice who they never mention. And then there is the matter of narcissism, one of the most important and misunderstood forces in Greene's framework. We tend to use narcissist as an insult, a word reserved for the loudly self-important, the obviously arrogant. But Greene draws on the work of psychoanalysts like Heinz Kohut to describe something far more nuanced and far more common. a spectrum of self-absorption that exists in all of us, shaped by our earliest experiences of whether the world reflected us lovingly or coldly. Deep narcissism is not primarily about arrogance. It is about fragility. It is about a self that never fully solidified, that requires constant external validation because it does not trust its own value. And when that validation is threatened, the response is not sadness. The response is rage. This is why certain people react with volcanic fury to minor criticism. Why some individuals are capable of profound charm one moment and sudden cruelty the next. Why some people, no matter how much they receive, always feel cheated. Understanding this dynamic doesn't mean excusing it. It means seeing it clearly, and that clarity protects you. Because when you can identify the emotional architecture beneath someone's behavior, you stop taking their reactions personally. You stop being pulled into dramas designed, unconsciously, to satisfy someone else's psychological needs. You become, in Greene's words, a reader of human character, one of the rarest and most powerful skills a person can possess. Section 3. The destructive side of human nature. There is a chapter in Greene's book that makes most readers uncomfortable, because it holds up a mirror that reflects something they recognize but have never admitted to. It is the chapter on envy. Envy is possibly the most universal and least acknowledged emotion in human experience. We feel it constantly, toward colleagues who get promoted, friends who seem to have easier lives, strangers on the internet who appear to have everything we want. But we almost never call it by its name. We disguise it as criticism. Well, they didn't really deserve it. We disguise it as concern. I just worry about whether they can handle that kind of success. We disguise it as principle. People like that shouldn't be rewarded. Greene traces this through history with devastating clarity. He examines how envy, when left unexamined, doesn't just poison relationships, it corrupts judgment. It causes people to make decisions against their own interests simply to prevent someone they envy from getting ahead. There's a story Greene tells about the Athenian general Alcibiades, one of the most brilliant military minds of the ancient world, protégé of Socrates, a man of extraordinary gifts. But wherever Alcibiades went, he ignited the envy of those around him so intensely that rather than using his talent, they spent their energy destroying him. He was exiled not once, but twice, not because of failure, but because his success was unbearable to those who couldn't match it. This is one of Greene's deeper insights. Extraordinary people are dangerous to mediocre environments, not because they are arrogant, though sometimes they are, but because their very existence is a constant reminder to others of what they haven't achieved. And rather than being inspired, many people respond with the ancient impulse to level the playing field. This should make you think carefully about two things: the environments you choose and whether you may be carrying envy yourself without knowing it. Then there is grandiosity, the inflated self-image that quietly infects not just our egos, but our decisions. Greene points to Napoleon as the supreme example, a man who began with genuine military genius, genuine strategic brilliance, genuine reform impulses. But with each success, his self-image expanded beyond what reality could support. He started to believe that the ordinary rules of war, of weather, of human endurance did not apply to him. He invaded Russia in winter with 500,000 men. You know what happened. Grandiosity is not reserved for emperors. It lives in the entrepreneur who cannot hear bad news about their company, in the parent who cannot accept their child's limitations, in all of us, in the quiet moments when success makes us feel invincible, just before reality reminds us that we are not. And perhaps most unsettling of all, Self-sabotage. Why do people, intelligent, capable people, repeatedly create the conditions for their own failure? Why do they push away the relationships that could sustain them, undermine the projects they worked hardest to build, make the one decision that unravels everything? Greene argues, drawing on deep psychological research, that self-sabotage is almost never random. It is, in its way, a form of emotional logic. Some people sabotage because they fear success more than failure, because success would raise the stakes and increase the possibility of a more devastating fall later. Some sabotage because the pain of making something happen is less familiar than the pain of watching it fall apart, and we are drawn, mysteriously, toward what is familiar. The point is not to feel hopeless about these tendencies. The point, always in Greene's work, is to see them. Because you cannot outmaneuver a force you cannot name. Section 4. Mastering yourself. So, what do we do with all of this? If we are driven by emotions we don't fully see, surrounded by people whose motivations are hidden even from themselves, vulnerable to forces like envy and grandiosity and self-destruction, what is the path forward? Greene doesn't offer easy answers, because easy answers would insult the complexity of what he's describing. But he does offer something more valuable, a framework for becoming more yourself, the version of you that is less reactive, more aware, more capable of choosing rather than simply reacting. The first practice is what he calls deep self-observation. This is not therapy, it is not journaling, though journaling can help. It is the cultivation of a specific mental posture, the ability to step slightly outside your own experience and witness it as it happens. To notice that you are becoming angry before the anger fully takes over. To recognize the quality of your envy before it reshapes your judgment. To catch the story your ego is telling before you believe it completely. Think of it as developing an internal witness, a quiet, non-judgmental presence that watches the drama of your emotional life without being fully swept away by it. This is ancient wisdom. The Stoics practiced it. Buddhist meditation traditions have elaborate names for it. What Greene adds is the psychological precision to understand why this is so difficult and what specific patterns we need to watch for in ourselves. The second practice is the development of genuine empathy. And here, Greene makes a distinction that I find remarkable. Most of us think of empathy as a feeling, the capacity to be moved by another person's pain. And that is part of it. But Greene describes empathy as also being a skill, a learnable, practicable ability to temporarily inhabit someone else's perspective. Not to agree with them, not to excuse them, but to genuinely understand the world as they experience it. He points to Abraham Lincoln as one of history's great practitioners of this kind of empathy. Lincoln was surrounded by rivals, critics, political enemies, and his approach to all of them was the same. He would work to genuinely understand what they feared, what they needed, what they were protecting. Not because he was a pushover, he was anything but because understanding your opposition is the precondition for either convincing them or neutralizing them effectively. The practical benefit of this kind of empathy is enormous. In every negotiation, every difficult conversation, every relationship under strain, the person who can accurately model what the other side is feeling and wanting holds an extraordinary advantage. Not a manipulative advantage, a human one. The third practice is perhaps the most challenging: long-term thinking in a short-term world. Greene argues that one of the defining characteristics of what he calls the higher human self, the version of us that is most truly free, is the ability to delay gratification at the emotional level, to feel the pull of immediate anger, immediate revenge, immediate validation, and to choose instead the response that serves your actual interests over months and years. Marcus Aurelius again. He was insulted by senators, undermined by generals, betrayed by supposed allies. And his response, most of the time, was to do nothing, or to act with such measured, considered deliberateness that his opponents couldn't quite believe it. Not because he felt nothing, but because he had trained himself to ask one question before acting: will this still matter in 5 years? Most of what enrages us will not still matter in 5 years. Most of what we desperately want in the next 5 minutes will look very different in 5 years. This simple shift in time horizon can transform the quality of your decisions almost immediately. Section 5. Why this book matters today. Robert Greene published The Laws of Human Nature in 2018, and if anything, its relevance has grown sharper since then, not faded. Because we are living through a period that is, in many ways, the perfect laboratory for everything Greene describes. Social media has not created new human tendencies, it has amplified old ones to an unprecedented scale. The tribal instinct, the ancient need to belong to a group and define ourselves against another group, now operates at the speed of the internet, across billions of people simultaneously. What took centuries to harden into ideology now takes weeks. What took decades to build as a reputation now takes days to destroy. The performative self, the mask, has found its perfect medium in the curated profile, the filtered photograph, the personal brand. We have become extraordinarily sophisticated at presenting a version of ourselves to the world. And in doing so, we have become correspondingly more confused about who we actually are beneath the performance. Envy, which has always existed, now has an infinite feed of curated successes, beautiful lives, and effortless achievements to feed on. Greene predicted this. When the gap between what we see others having and what we have ourselves becomes both visible and vast, envy becomes a cultural phenomenon, not just a personal one. And we see the effects everywhere, in the quality of online discourse, in the way we talk about successful people, in the strange pleasure some people take in failure of the prominent. And then there is the question of information overload, the idea that having access to more facts has not somehow made us more rational. If anything, it has made us more tribal, because information now comes pre-sorted by the algorithm into streams that confirm what we already believe. We are more confident than ever, and no less wrong. In this environment, the person who has done the work of self-knowledge, who can recognize their own biases, manage their emotional reactions, read the motivations of others, and think in longer time horizons, is not just psychologically healthier, they are functionally more effective in every domain of life. Greene's book is, in this sense, not philosophy for its own sake. It is practical survival equipment for a world that has become a masterclass in manipulating the least examined parts of human nature. The mindful reflection. I want to leave you with something that isn't in the book, or rather, something that lives in the space between all of its pages. Robert Greene spent decades studying history's most powerful, most creative, most disruptive, and most transformative human beings. He read their letters, their diaries, their confessions, the things they said about themselves, and the things they said about each other. And what he found, beneath all the drama and ambition and tragedy, was this: the people who lived most fully were the ones who had met themselves honestly. Not the people who were perfect, not the ones without shadow, without envy, without fear. The ones who looked. The ones who were willing to see the mask they wore and ask, quietly, what was behind it. The ones who felt the pull of anger, of grandiosity, of self-destruction. And instead of denying those impulses or surrendering to them, chose. That choice, made thousands of times across a life, often imperfectly, often with backsliding, always with effort, is what Greene means by mastery. Not mastery over other people, mastery over the least conscious version of yourself. There is a line from Marcus Aurelius that I think captures the spirit of everything this book is trying to give you. Writing to himself, alone, at the end of a day spent governing the most powerful empire in the world, he said, "Confine yourself to the present. Not to the story you tell about yourself, not to the image others have of you, not to the future you're anxious about, or the past you're ashamed of. Just this moment, just this choice. You are not the emotions that move through you, you are the awareness that watches them. And that awareness, that small, steady, quiet witness, is more powerful than anything outside you will ever be." This book changed the way I see people, including myself. And I think the most honest thing I can say is, I'm still learning. Still catching the moments where emotion takes the wheel before I notice it happening. Still recognizing old patterns in new situations. That's not a failure. That's the practice. So I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know your answer in the comments. Of all the forces we talked about today, the emotional blindness, the envy, the grandiosity, the self-sabotage, the masks we wear, which one do you recognize most clearly in yourself? And what has knowing about it changed for you? If this video made you think differently about yourself or the people around you, share it with someone who you think is ready to see what Greene is pointing at. And if you haven't read The Laws of Human Nature yet, I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It is dense, it is challenging, and it will not flatter you. But very few books will serve you more honestly. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself, and maybe now, a little better care of the hidden self, too.